In today's video, we're going to talk about investing through the worst of times. And so we're talking about this because today there's like a lot of uncertainty and people are like panicking because the market has not been doing so well recently. And so we'll be recounting some of the worst times in history, particularly from 1914 to 1950.
I see. So some of the worst times ever in history or some worst times in the last 100 or so years?
In the last 100 or so years.
Okay.
And so going to 1914, let's say I was an employee. Let's say I was a teacher, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So 1914, the average per capita income was around $687. And per capita income means per person income. But at that time, usually in the family, only one person worked. So you could say that was the per household income. So the per household income was $687 in 1914. And so if we want to get a feel for that today, if we account for all the inflation and deflation that has happened in the past 100 or so years, that same $687 today would be worth $17,000.
$17,000. So basically what $687 bought in 1914 is about the same as what $17,000 buys today.
Yeah.
Right? So that's factoring in the inflation and deflation, mostly inflation, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so $17,000 is not like really a lot. Today, the average per capita income in 2019 was around $50,000. So 2 to 3 times more. And that's because like the United States, you could say, has gotten 2 to 3 times richer in the past 100 years.
I see. Okay.
But average is not a really accurate representation, and that's because let's say you have a person making $1 billion a year, okay, in income, and following that you have 9 other regular folks, okay? And so if you find the average of that, it would be around 100 million, and that's not like accurate, right? So a better representation would be to find the median per capita income, and that was around $35,000.
So you're still 2 times richer in terms of your purchasing power, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what you technically, with inflation and deflation, that $687 in 1914 should have amounted to like $17,000, but you still $35,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's still like 2 times richer than what you were in 1914 as an employee, right?
Yeah.
As a teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so if we go back to 1914 and we account for inflation that has happened from 1914 to 1950, by 1950, the $687 would be worth $1,700.
So why this 35-year time frame?
30?
Why are you stopping at 1950?
Because 30 to 35 years is like the average career lifespan, and so people usually work 30 to 35 years, then retire.
I see. So you are starting to work in 1914 and you are retiring in 1950, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And why did you pick this period again, by the way? Time frame?
Because there were lots of significant events that happened during this time.
Okay.
Which we'll talk about later.
Okay.
And so during this time, these were the annualized stock market returns. And so towards the end of 1914, we had World War I. And then following that, we had the Spanish flu pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, we had the stock market
boom. In the 1920s, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we had the Great Depression.
Uh-huh.
And then
I think some say the Great Depression was caused by rampant speculation in the stock market, right? Where people were borrowing money using leverage, okay? And we know what leverage is, right? Leverage is borrowing money and investing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people were doing a lot of that during the 1920s, which caused a stock market boom.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly the stock market started falling, right?
Yeah.
And that eventually led to what?
The Great Depression.
The Great Depression, right? Okay, of 1930s, right? Okay.
And then
what?
Slowly we led up to World War II.
So that was in the late 1930s
40s,
to mid 40s, right? So the World War II basically ended with the surrender of Japanese forces post the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? Okay.
And then around 1950 we had the Korean War.
I see. So it ended. So you started out with the First World War, with pandemics, with recessions and
Yeah.
depressions, and you ended up with the Korean War, right? So pretty bad times, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of upheaval in the world, a lot of bad things with the markets, with the economies, and still, what are you going to show?
And still, if we had invested just $1 in American businesses during that time
How would you invest in American businesses?
by buying shares of companies,
Yeah, but through the stock market, right?
yeah.
Okay.
that $1 would have turned to $15 by 1950, even through all those events.
Okay. So a dollar invested in 1914 and left untouched through all the ups and downs, and there were some pretty big ups, but pretty steep downs as well, and it still turned out okay, right?
Yeah.
Relatively okay, right? Okay.
And so, if I was an employee and I had saved and invested 10% of my income each year, or 15%, or 20% of my income, by 1950, I would have about $40,000 for retirement.
$40,000 is with 20% of savings, right?
Yeah, with 20%.
And $20,000 with
10% of
I
saving.
see. So what's a typical ballpark amount of money you should retire with typically, in the sense that if you want to continue living off that money?
And so, like a rule of thumb for retirement is like you should save about 20 to 25% of your 20 to 25 times your income for retirement.
I see. So last year's income, right? And that should technically, if managed well, should technically last you
Your retirement.
to the rest of your life, right? So you started off saying that you were a teacher, right?
Yeah. And so teachers like earn a benefit, like so the government sets aside money for them, and that's called pension. So when they retire, they have that money, so they don't have to they technically don't have to save for their retirement.
So it depends on what kind of money you need, right? But if you need a lot of money to live on, right, then a little bit of savings is good. But the fact that you have pension sitting aside should take care of your retirement in worst case scenario, right? So what did you do to be able to save that kind of money? Did you have to sacrifice a lot?
It really depends on your lifestyle. Like, you would have to obviously set aside money and be aware of what you're spending on, and just be aware of how much you're spending on what.
So 20%, I think it's theoretically possible to live a reasonably good life and still be able to save that kind of money, right? So it is not like this teacher did anything extraordinary in terms of the amount of money she saved, right? So she did an average job, and she got the returns of what the markets, what the US businesses delivered, right? Okay.
And so, since I'm a teacher, and if the pension was enough to sustain me throughout retirement, and if I didn't need all the money I had saved and invested, and if I kept it invested today, if it was invested at 20%, it would be worth $40 million.
Oh, so if you had this 20% of savings and you stopped in 1950, right? Stopped working, but since you didn't need the money, you left it alone, right? And you left it invested in American businesses, and you let it grow. It grew to about 40 some odd million dollars, right? So it's a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
And you're talking about someone who is relatively average, right? A pretty ordinary income, person with pretty ordinary income, just the wherewithal to withstand a lot of ups and downs and bad things and good times and bad times in the economy and the market, and be able to sustain through that, and you end up with this kind of wealth, right?
And sometimes we hear those stories where ordinary people, when they pass away, they donate $10 million to the library or something like that. And so this is because of investing over time and compounding, and
mostly it's time and being invested in capitalism, right? So basically it is time and the extent of that time which does most of the magic, right? Okay.
And so what we learned from this is that there was no worse time to be an investor, and yet they still turned out okay.
So what do you want to end with?
The moral, you could say, is to have like
a plan, right?
to have a plan.
And stick to it.
Yeah, stick to it. Don't like panic.
And things, hope will be all right? We hope things will be all right. Not that the current pandemic or whatever situation we are going to get, we like nobody knows what's going to happen, right? But we just have to hope that things will be okay in the long run. Okay. Anything else you want to add?
No.
Okay.
So that's about it. Thanks for watching.
Okay.